giving, and there are things that we sometimes take for granted until they're taken away. I was thinking about that very same thing, and just thinking how thankful I am for certain abilities of communications right now. I'm thankful my daughter's in Kentucky, and yet I've got this ability to pick up a phone and talk to her. I can see a video of her. I can FaceTime. How precious that is to be able to do that. However, nothing beats face-to-face, and that's no more clearer than the present time to just think about things like that. I am thankful that brethren are using Zoom. They're using other programs. There are a lot of studies that are being put online. A lot of that is available. I'm very thankful for that. But if we think that should replace what we are meant to do as a church, then we're missing it. Now, there's things we do as a Christian in an assembly, and there are things we do outside of an assembly. Both are a part of following Christ. But while I want to encourage us that while we are challenged at this present time, what I want us to do is to look forward even more so to the time when this is all over, that these restrictions are no longer necessary. And I was just thinking how John wrote in 2 John 1, verse 12. He's writing to this one that he calls the elect lady and her children. And that's the means of communication that he has at the present time. But notice what he says in verse 12 of 2 John. Having many things to write unto you, I would not write with paper and ink, but I trust to come unto you and speak face to face, that our joy may be full. Just nothing better than face to face, being together in the same room. I mean, whether that's true with a family meal, yeah, we can Skype in, that's nice. It's a nice feature. I like that ability. And we should use that when we can't be together in the same room. But nothing beats face-to-face. In 3 John, the same writer to a different audience. He's writing to Gaius here. He says basically the same thing. In 3 John, in verse 13, I had many things to write, but I will not with ink and pen write unto thee. But I trust I shall shortly see thee, and we shall speak face to face. Isn't that just true right now? Paul had similar statements when he wrote to the Corinthians, but yet he wanted to be there in person. There were things that they needed to teach and to guide, to set in order. That church was in need of some direction. Yeah, it's great to be able to write and to be able to communicate with whatever means you have. Sometimes it's by messengers. Paul was in prison in certain times and he wrote letters. And yet what he did was he was longing to be with his brethren. That's so clear when you look at Philippians chapter 1. I want to just draw your attention to see how pertinent this just seems right now. Now, this is a different circumstance for Paul. He's in jail. We're not in jail. I'm not saying that. But they were separated by their circumstance. But yet he's thinking about his brethren. And notice what he says in Philippians 1, beginning at verse 3, how he writes to them. Philippians 1 and verse 3. I thank my God upon every remembrance of you. He's not with them presently in person, but he's thinking about them. He's remembering them. And he has a fond thought process here. Verse 4, always in every prayer of mine for you all, making requests with joy. So he's thankful for them. He's praying for them. Verse 5, for your fellowship in the gospel from the first day until now. being confident of this very thing, that he which hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. So he's expecting the best out of his brethren. Then verse 7, even as it is meet for me to think this of you all, because I have you in my heart, inasmuch as both in my bonds and in the defense and confirmation of the gospel, ye all are partakers of my grace. Notice the bond that he still has, even though they're separated by space. He still has them in his heart. If we are separated physically, we should still have one another in our heart. And notice that his thoughts are so fond. He says in verse 8, for God is my record, how greatly I long after you all in the bowels of Jesus Christ. We don't normally talk like that with the bowels, but that was thought of, it was an expression of their inward person. You ever have your insides yearn? You can just feel the size of your brethren, the concerns of your brethren. That's what he's talking about, is these. It's an expression of how he longed after them. So what I am saying is, if we're separated by space, we can still long to be together. We can still miss it in our heart, and we can still think of each other this way. Verse 9, and this I pray, that your love may abound yet more and more in knowledge and in all judgment, that you may approve things that are excellent, that you may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ, being filled with the fruits of righteousness, which are by Jesus Christ, and the glory and praise of God. See, he wants them to do right. He wants them to continue to live the way a Christian should. He wants them to have that character that should follow by one who's been bought by the blood of Christ. But then he says in verse 12, notice how he's looking at the bright side. You might think Paul is down in the dumps. You might think that he's so discouraged because he's writing from chains. He's limited. Yeah, he's missing his brethren. But notice he says in verse 12, but I would you should understand, brethren, that the things which happened unto me have fallen out rather unto the furtherance of the gospel, so that my bonds in Christ are manifest in all the palace and all other places. And many of the brethren in the Lord, waxing confident by my bonds, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Paul just has this amazing ability to look at the positives of this situation, even though it was pretty negative in a lot of ways. What he's doing is he's saying, look at what has been able to happen in a good light because of where I'm at. You think Paul really wanted to be in a jail? You think he really wanted to have that limitation placed upon him? Of course not. But look at the good things that were coming from it. I think we can learn something here. Think of the good things that brethren are doing about sharing the gospel, thinking about things, being more thankful of things, contacting one another. There are some good things that we need to look for and think about, and be just on the upside about some of those things. Look at the bright side. I think Paul just has this great ability to do that. Even though he then recognizes there are some people who are preaching the gospel for false motives, but yet what is he doing? He's thankful that what? That at least Christ is being preached. So that's, again, Paul's looking at the bright side of things. And so then he's praying for... So I'm just making the point. Separated by space, but yet he's thinking of his brethren. He's thankful for the things he does have. He is missing them. He is craving to be with them. And so I think that's what we need to do. When we're not able to meet with all of us together, what should we be doing? Not saying, oh, I like this. You know, we can just replace the church with an online church. If that is the thought process of anybody at this time, that would be the furthest thing from what we should be thinking. What we should be thinking is, use those abilities, but crave the face-to-face so that when that is coming back, that we can appreciate it all the more. That's what we need to do. I mean, sometimes people don't value the ability to gather together as God's people as they should. Sometimes people think because sometimes there are circumstances among brethren that sometimes they don't always treat each other the way they should. Sometimes there's infighting. Sometimes there are things that sometimes people of God don't do right. And sometimes people use things like that to say, I'm just going to throw the whole thing away. I don't need the church. Absolutely not. That ought not be our position. What we should be doing is realizing how precious this unit that God has made is. The ability to gather together. The ability to come together and commune. Taking the Lord's Supper. Think about that whole word, communion. It's something that is meant to be done together. It is something that is our collective gathering of the funds, the singing together. Yes, I love the ability that there are videos being shared that you can listen to hymns online. I love that. I'll do it. I listen to it. But not replace us coming together to sing together. It just doesn't replace it. Nothing beats face-to-face and gathering together. And so I'm just trying to make that point. And what's been going through my mind is just times in God's people's history where they were limited for various reasons. In Acts chapter 8, we have an example of where there was a persecution and they were being scattered. We're not being persecuted, but they were scattered. What did they do? It makes me wonder, what did they do during that time? You know what? They didn't leave their religion behind just because they were being scattered. They took their faith with them where they went. And they shared it. They went everywhere preaching the word, wherever they were. And we can do that if we're doing it from a phone or if we're doing it from online or wherever we are, whatever our capabilities are. If we got put in jail like Paul, we should be sharing the gospel wherever we are. We should be going everywhere, wherever we're able. The Lord said, shout it from the rooftops. And so that needs to be our case. Just because one may be quarantined or maybe staying at home does not mean that we're going to keep our faith to ourselves. We're going to communicate however we can, whatever means that we're able. That gospel needs to be spread. If we believe in its power, it needs to get out there. Now, also, I'm thinking about times where David, for example, can you imagine when he was running from Saul for his life? I was thinking about that. What did David do? Do you think he thought, oh, this is just fine and dandy. I don't have to go and be among the multitude of God's people. I don't even have to worry about gathering together as we normally... Do you think that's what he said? Of course not. I don't think that he looked at it as a convenient thing at all, that he wasn't able to be with them. Notice just some of the statements that David makes about God's house. What's one of our favorite verses in Psalm 23? That very last part. What is he craving? To be with God. I shall dwell where? In the house of the Lord forever. That's what he wants. That's what he's craving. What about, turn to Psalm 42 for a moment. We sing the song, As the Deer. Have you ever thought about some of the other particulars of the psalm? I just want to draw your attention to this a little bit. This was a dear sister back in North Carolina. This was her favorite song. And she's passed away now. But I can't help but think about the words here and not think of her. But notice Psalm 42, though. As the hart or deer panteth after the water brook, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. Does your soul crave being with God? Does your soul crave to come together to worship with God's people? I believe that's what David is doing. Keep reading. Verse 2, my soul thirsteth for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? Well, you might think, okay, is he talking about appearing before him in his home? Is he talking about appearing before him at... When is he talking about? Keep reading. Verse 3, my tears have been my meat day and night, while they continually say to me, where is thy God? Look at verse 4. When I remember these things, I pour out my soul in me, for I had gone with the multitude. I went with them to the house of God, with the voice of joy and praise, with a multitude that kept holy day. What did they do as the people of God when they gathered together in the multitudes in these holy days? Can you imagine? That's just the fond memories that David is craving here. He's longing at, like a deer who's thirsty. His soul is crying out. He wants to be with the people of God. He wants to gather together and worship God, united with his brethren and with his sisters. Just the things associated when they came together. The 3 feasts that they had when they went to Jerusalem. Or the other gatherings that they had on the Sabbath days in the Old Testament. He is remembering this time with fondness. Where is David? Drop down to verse 6. O my God, my soul is cast down within me. Therefore will I remember thee from the land of Jordan, and of the Hermonites from the hill of Mizar. Look that up on your maps. See where Mount Hermon is, the Mount Hermon range, compared to Jerusalem. Look that up. They are separated. They are far away from each other. Now, why is David there? He's on this mountaintop that is over 9,000 feet tall. One might think, well, he's enjoying his time at this mountain peak, or he's enjoying the view. He's you know, there's things I love about mountaintops. We just think about that. But that was not talking about a physical mountaintop. That's talking about something spiritual there. But thinking about this Mount Hermon, what's David doing from this mountain? He is missing another mountain, Jerusalem, where the multitude gathered, because he wants to appear before God with the people of God. That's what he's craving. That's what he's longing for. And that's what I want to encourage us to do when we are separated. To want it. Pray for it. And when it comes back, appreciate it. And let the house be filled, so that we can be what we ought to be, and we can glorify God with our unified voices together. Look at Psalm 84. Let me point your attention to another psalm here. This is in the heart of David, who not only was remembering fondly times of gathering together as God's people. Look what he says in Psalm 84, verse 1. How amiable are thy tabernacles, O Lord of hosts. Amiable. Beautiful, pleasant. How lovely. Is that the way we think of it? And what does he mean by thy tabernacles? Tabernacle is just a tent. It's just a meeting place. It's temporary. Okay? It's not the tabernacle curtains. It's not the physical structure of the tabernacle that's important. That's not what he's talking about. But what he is talking about, wherever God is, that's what he's longing for. Verse 2, my soul longeth. Ask ourselves, does this describe me? Am I craving and longing for this like David? Yea, even fainteth for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh crieth out for the living God. Does that describe me? If it doesn't right now, I might need to do some self-inspection and ask myself why. Why not? Why not especially now? Or aren't we craving? Look what he says in verse 3. Yea, the sparrow hath found an house, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young, even thine altars, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God. Now, whether he is saying, a bird has its place, it has its home. My home is in the Lord's court. That's where I want to be. It's like he's jealous of the sparrow here. Have you ever been into there was a grocery store back home when you first walk in. It's a huge place. As soon as you walk in, you look up in the rafters. There's these bird nests. Do that. Go to the grocery stores and just, whenever you have to. But whenever you go, look at these bird nests up there. They're found this place. I wonder, had a bird made its place in the tabernacle or in the temple in certain spots? And yet what he's doing is, it's like he's in a good way jealous of this bird. You want to know why? Because this bird is right there where the atonement is taking place. He's right there where God's presence is. He's right there where the people of God are. Where the worship is taking place, gathered together. That's what he is craving. That's what he's missing. Verse 4, blessed are they that dwell in thy house. They will be still praising thee. You know what gathering together in the Lord's house does? It creates a marvelous amount of benefits. It should produce happiness. Is that not so obvious right here with this verse 4? How blessed they are to be able to praise God. Verse 5, blessed is the man whose strength is in thee, and whose heart are the ways of them. Not only does it provide happiness and blessings that way, it also provides strength. The strength that we get by coming together, feeding on one another, hearing another brother pray. Yeah, I can pray at home. Jesus taught me to. I should and will. But there's something about hearing another brother's prayer. I learned something from that. I learned from us joining our hearts together. There's something about, I can sing at home. But there's something about hearing our voices trying to blend together. You ever been singing and somebody's not present, but yet you can still hear their voice in your head? Because there's these certain parts of the songs that you just know are distinct, and you find yourself missing those that are not present. It's a part of that. But we gain strength from each other, even though we all have different functions. Seeing one another, looking each other in the eye, encouraging one another, asking each other how we're doing, the greeting before and after the worship services, all of those things are so important. Verse 6, who passing through the valley of Baca make it a well, the rain also filleth the pools. I think this is just another way of saying that it provides comfort. Verse 7, they go from strength to strength, every one of them in Zion appeareth before God. You know, whenever you're standing shoulder to shoulder with somebody else, it gives you strength. It works in an army, works in a classroom, it works on a ball field, and it works in a church. Have you ever found yourself wondering, what should I do? But then here's somebody beside of you, they're doing it and what they're supposed to be doing, and it makes it easier for you to follow along with them. That's what he's talking about. And then verse 8. O Lord God of hosts, hear my prayer. Give ear, O God of Jacob. Then verse 9. I love verse 9. Behold, O God, our shield, and look upon the face of thine anointed. This gathering in God's tabernacle is a shelter. It's a source of refuge. And there's a safety in gathering together under God's wings, under His protection. Verse 10, for a day in thy courts is better than 1,000. I had rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. You know what that's saying? Take the most humble position and let me do that in the house of God, and I'll take that any day over 1,000 others anywhere else. That needs to be my attitude. That ought to be what we think, especially right now, to be able to gather together. There's just some things that are meant to be done in the presence of God's people. Look at Psalm 116. Psalm 116 in verse 14. I will pay my vows unto the Lord now in the presence of all His people. Yeah, there's some things you do outside the assemblies, but there's some things you do in. Verse 18. I will pay my vows unto the Lord now in the presence of all His people, in the courts of the Lord's house, in the midst of thee, O Jerusalem. Praise ye the Lord. So I just think about these things. When David was hiding out in some cave or some pit, when he was running from Saul, while we might think that what he would be craving, and it would be natural for him to think this, it'd be nice to be home in his own bed. It'd be nice to be where he's not but a step between him and death. But yet, what's he craving? What's he missing the most? He's missing the congregation. He's missing the people of God and worshiping God together. In 2 Kings 24, there's an interesting prayer that Solomon makes at the dedication of the temple. And he prophesies here a little and foreshadows of what might happen in the future. 2 Kings 24:2. I apologize. 2 Chronicles chapter 6. 2 Chronicles chapter 6 in verse 36. He's praying to God, and he says, if they sin against thee, for there's no man which sinneth not, and thou be angry with them and deliver them over before their enemies, and they carry them away captives unto a land far off or near. Yet if they bethink themselves in the land whither they are carried captive, and turn and pray unto thee in the land of their captivity, saying, we have sinned, we've done amiss, and have dealt wickedly. If they return to thee with all their heart and with all their soul in the land of their captivity, whither they have carried themselves, and pray toward their land, which thou gavest unto their fathers, toward the city which thou hast chosen, and toward the house which I have built for thy name, then hear thou from the heavens, even from thy dwelling place, their prayer and their supplications, and maintain their cause, and forgive thy people which have sinned against thee. Now sometimes people want to try to think of this from an American point of view, and they think of our patriotism to America healing our land. He's talking about the nation of Israel here. But I do think the way to apply this and learn from this for ourselves is when we have done wrong, if we are being chastised, or whether we're not. Maybe we haven't done wrong and we're just our circumstances, but praying towards God. God can hear those prayers and still help us in that time. And what did they do? We have the answer in 2 Chronicles 7 that God made to Solomon's prayer. Verse 12 of chapter 7. And the Lord appeared to Solomon by night and said to him, I've heard thy prayer and have chosen this place to myself for an house of sacrifice. If I shut up heaven and there be no rain, or if I command the locusts to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, if my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. And so God's ears are open. And you know what I find very interesting is when Daniel was taken into captivity, he did just that. Could you imagine soldiers coming in and just carrying away 10,000 at one time? Could you imagine them burning the place of worship down? And yet, while that place was burnt, Daniel, off in a far land, far country, among different people, while they're trying to change his name and simulating him into that culture, he took his faith with him. He still remembered who he was. He still purposed in his own heart not to defile himself. He was still going to live by the principles that God has given him within the circumstances he was. And then whenever they made it against the law to pray, he kept on praying 3 times a day, as he always did. And he prayed towards the house. It's interesting. The house had been burnt. But yet he's praying towards the temple. So what is that? I mean, it's not towards the physical that's not even there. It's in his heart. So I'm saying, even the tabernacle or the temple, while it was not meant to cage God in, the heaven of heavens cannot contain God. God cannot be caged into a box. And while the temple today is not a physical dwelling, we are the temple, but we should long to gather together as God's people. We should pray together. We should still be together in heart. We should still desire it. We can still worship within the circumstances we are. In 1 Samuel 20, do you remember when David was running from Saul? In this case, he had just said to Jonathan, there's a step between me and death. But then David's afraid for his life. Who could blame him for leaving? Because if he stays, he's a dead man. Okay? Who could blame him? But Jonathan still tells him in 1 Samuel 20 that the new moon is here. We're going to be gathered together. There's going to be an empty seat, and you're going to be missed. You know, I think that still needs to be present. What more pertinent example? Different circumstances, but what more example for us in our attitude that we should have towards one another? That our seat, your seat, is still missed. I used to practice sermons to empty pews before I would actually deliver them. Never thought the day might actually come where I would actually preach to empty pews while it's being broadcast. But, you know, again, it makes you appreciate the ability to gather together. Lord willing, when it comes back, let's treasure that. Psalm 35:18, give thanks in the great congregation. Hebrews 2:12 is a New Testament example that is quoting a psalm about in the midst of the church will I sing praise unto thy name. Some things are just meant to be done in the church, gathered together. So do what we can, but don't make it replace it in our heart and continue to live right. Let me end with 2 Kings 5. So if we can't be together physically, we can be in heart. We can desire it. We can miss it. We can pray for one another. We can still worship. And we can care for each other. 2 Kings chapter 5, there was a young girl who was carried into captivity by an Assyrian. yet she still cared for her captor. In 2 Kings chapter 5, this young girl, even though she's away from home, even though she's away from everything she's always known, what's she doing? Here's her master that has leprosy, but she still cares for him, and she says, if he could be back home, I know a prophet that could heal him. And so she mentions that to him. Naaman comes, and he ends up being healed. It's a fabulous story. I invite you to read it in 2 Kings 5. The circumstances that were given is a little unorthodox. He would be cleansed of his leprosy when he goes and dips himself in the Jordan River 7 times. And at first the man is upset. He's mad. He's angry. He's wondering, well, what is that? I just didn't imagine it. He thought it would be another way. He thought there'd be, why that river? Why not another river? And so obviously there's some questions that he had in his own mind, which is sometimes our reaction to what we're being told by God. So there are some commands that God gives us that seems ridiculous at first, and yet that's His command. And so what Naaman does, he finally listens to the advice of one and says, if he told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? If he says go and dip and be clean, basically how easy is that? That's not hard. Go and dip. And you know what? He went and dipped himself in the Jordan River 7 times. When he came up, his skin was clean. Well, today we're given a similar kind of command. Not for the cleansing of leprosy, but the cleansing of a greater sin, or greater plague, and that's sin. We can be cleansed of sin. Not by dipping 7 times, but just dipping once. In any water. Doesn't matter where it's at. And you can be cleansed of your sin by being baptized in water into the death of Christ. You're raised to walk in newness of life. Why not do that? And have that forgiveness through the blood of Christ that He offers. If you haven't done that, you're not clean. If you have not been baptized, put under the water for the reason to remove your sins. Maybe you were baptized for another reason. Maybe you weren't really baptized. Maybe you were just sprinkled or poured. Or maybe you didn't understand what you were doing. I want to encourage you. Do it right. Take care of that. We're happy to assist you. Don't put that off. Whatever your need is, you can let it be made known. Or you can call me, and we'll take care of that. Won't you do that? Thank you.